Today on Talking Solutions, I think this is well timed for the holidays. I'd like to welcome Michael Fetter and Dr. Daniel Sorborn. Both of you have to do with prayerspark.com. We'll get into that. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Really excited to talk about this for so many reasons. I'm just noticing that there is a lot of holiday depression, a lot of sadness during this time of the year. And I think part of the problem is that people say, oh, it's the happiest time of the year. And if you don't feel that way, you're not in with the rest of it. You guys are both in to talk about something brand new called prayerspark.com. And this is a new app that has to do with recovery, addiction. Is that right?
Well, prayerspark.com is a broader vision, and the vision of prayerspark.com was to be able to bring prayer and spiritual messages and affirmation to people who don't necessarily have connection in that area. Over the last 15 years particularly, we've seen this great rise in people who call themselves the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They check the box nun when asked, what is your religious affiliation? And there have been some big studies done on this very recently. What's interesting about that group, and it's a quickly growing group, particularly in the millennial category, what's interesting about that group is specifically that those people who say that they are spiritual but not religious, 90% believe in a higher power, and 89% believe in the power of prayer. So normally you'd say, geez, you believe in the power of prayer and a higher power? That sounds religious to me. So what they really are saying when they say that they're spiritual but not religious is they don't have the connection, the classical, call it maybe religion 1.0 connection, to the way it was done historically, which is you drew a 10-mile circle around your home, and you would then go on the weekend to some sort of bricks and mortar, if you will, place that represented whatever spiritual upbringing you had or whatever connection that you had in a bricks and mortar way. And people nowadays either don't feel the need to have that continuous connection to a community like that, or they can't find anything within that geographic region that really speaks to them deeply for whatever reasons have happened in recent history, etc. So what we wanted to do with PrayerSpark was go around the world and find some of the most amazing spiritual leaders in all these different interfaith categories. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. We were looking for folks that felt interfaith. So regardless if they're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or indigenous, Sikhs, Buddhists, they would all be interfaith friendly and also have very hands-on charitable efforts that they're personally involved with in their communities. We can talk more about that in a few minutes, but the concept of our technology was to be identifying those folks and then bringing them into the fold so that people could come on to PrayerSpark, find a spiritual leader whose philosophy and life work they thought was really important and righteous, and have that person then be able to support them or a loved one with prayer or affirmation.
Interesting. Michael Fetter is who we're talking with concerning prayerspark.com. And Michael, one of the things that I've noticed, you mentioned that a lot of the millennials are saying that they don't really have a religious affiliation, although they do feel spiritual and they do believe in things like the power of prayer. The ones that I've come across, and even some older people, seem to have a problem with this who have those beliefs but don't really identify with a regional or area church per se. They seem to have a problem with what they consider organized religion. They believe in concepts, but they are somewhat distrustful about getting involved with one specific group.
That's exactly right. I can't speak to every individual's set of reasons for why they would have that issue. But when it comes to the spiritual leaders that we have brought into PrayerSpark, they are interfaith, as I mentioned. They have grassroots, hands-on charitable efforts. For example, we have Peggy Well-Known Buffalo. She was honored by the Dalai Lama as one of 51 points of light in the world. She's on the Crow Nation and represents indigenous Crow belief, which is really beautiful. I urge everyone to go to the site and check out Peggy's belief system. She has a food bank there, and she has a clothing drive there, and she is helping some of the poorest people really in the world. It's a level of poverty where they're off the grid. They don't have running water, they don't have plumbing, that sort of thing. Locally, we have, for example, Reverend Willie Jones, who spent the last 28 years in the juvenile justice system working with at-risk juvenile offenders, helping one kid at a time get on the right track and helping these young people with creative expression to bring them away from the path that they were on and onto a path that is a fulfilling one but a legal one. And we have a number of other local practitioners in that same area. So they're all doing those kinds of things. Finally, they're all LGBTQ embracing. We're very pro-civil rights, of course, at Prayer Spark, and we want it to be a safe space for everyone. And so we've screened for people who are accepting and embracing of all kinds of beliefs and ways of life. So those were the core elements of what we felt tended to be commonalities with people who didn't have the connection to traditional bricks and mortar, as you had mentioned before. Those were very, very important elements of how we pulled that together. But I wanted to speak to the app because I think that's really important, and Dr. Sarborn can really talk about it.
You've got some amazing people who are involved with giving this support through the PrayerSpark app, prayerspark.com. We mentioned at the beginning of the show that this can be a very dark time of the year for a lot of people. And I know that one of the things that you're helping with the PrayerSpark app is a support system. And that's what a lot of people are missing, especially at this time of the year. During this, it should be happy time of the year. Don't feel that way. It makes for some really troublesome feelings.
That's right, from either side. For example, we now work in a more diverse society, as we know, and maybe you have a Muslim friend that you work with and you want to send them a prayer blessing for the holidays, but you don't know how to pray in that way. We have really wonderful imams on board that you can ask to send a prayer to them via an email or a card, etc. So we offer that opportunity to do that kind of outreach or to get that sort of support for yourself. So it's fairly broad. The genesis of it was when Nelson Mandela got sick and went into the hospital, and his supporters were asking everyone in the world to pray for him. And I saw that and I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could organize prayers from wonderful interfaith leaders and have them actually be delivered to Nelson Mandela? And that was the genesis. That was the sort of the spark of Prayer Spark. And once we were able to create a technology that unifies those, when you ask for a prayer from our Australian Aboriginal spiritual leader, she is in the rainforest in Australia and literally gets that prayer request right to her, and she will say your blessing. So the technology to do all of that is fairly complex. But now that we have that, that allows us to go into the app world and go into medical environments where spiritual support and stress reduction can play a big, big difference in helping people. And addiction is the first place we're going to. And Dr. Sarborn can speak quite a bit about the development of that app. He has a lot of experience in developing those apps and is a telemedicine physician and leader in that space.
The internet has made the world a very small place. And this app, I'm excited to hear about it. Dr. Daniel Sarborn is with us. Now, you're also involved with the PrayerSpark app.
I am. The way that we see Prayer Spark is we're a platform for welcoming people so that they can feel better. And one of the ways that we can do that is with addiction. I wanted to back up a little bit to talk about how bad is the addiction problem. We know that it costs $500 billion per year in the United States alone for all of the costs associated with addiction. And that can be the actual cost of not going to work and instead using drugs. It could be the cost of getting caught and going to jail, and then society has to pay for your incarceration. It could be the lost human life from somebody dying from an overdose. It is a huge problem that affects everybody.
There's no question about that. We get reminders every day, people who we have lost forever because they could not overcome their addiction. Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, days ago. We have lost actors who are so important to us. People like Philip Seymour Hoffman could not overcome his addiction. I can't even go through the whole list. We're constantly losing people who can't lift up above that addiction.
That's correct. And there's two recent pieces of information that you'll want to know about. Number one, about a month and a half ago, President Obama shined the spotlight on addiction. And he said, we have to come up with solutions. It's just getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. So we have the entire power of the nation behind this push to make things better for people who are addicted. Another thing to think about is that a group of scientists from Princeton were looking over the data from the CDC. The CDC is the national organization that tracks morbidity and mortality. What makes us as Americans sick? What makes us die? And year over year, our mortality has been decreasing about 0.3% year over year. And that means that doctors and medical technology are doing very well, right? Now, we'd like to see it go down faster, but at least it's trending down. They uncovered a very surprising statistic. It's actually increasing. The death rate is increasing among a certain group of people. And those happen to be Caucasians in their 40s and early 50s. Now, that should cause some pause. Why should the most, some people might say, empowered group They should have jobs. They should be doing very well for themselves. Why would their mortality be increasing? It turns out it's due to addiction and addiction-related diseases such as suicide, depression, homicide. And so if that is increasing, it means we're doing something wrong. That's where I would like to come in with PrayerSpark, because what we're trying to do is create apps that bring people together. And we're trying to find hope in what is a very sad situation.
Specifically, if I might, one of the issues with addiction happens to be that in addition to what the doctor has just told you, there's 22.3 million people in recovery today in the United States alone.
I didn't know that.
You have a relapse rate of 92%. And what's fascinating about the relapse rate is that the time people tend to relapse isn't while they're actively engaged in their rehab. In other words, if you walk into, I don't know, an AA meeting, or you walk into any of the places, for example, we're working here locally with Solutions Recovery, and they're a wonderful facility. They've done so much great work here. People don't relapse while they're there. They relapse when they leave. And what we've created with our app is the ability of people to leave the immediate community, but keep the community with them. Because our app has some key features to it that are unavailable and groundbreaking right now in the addiction space.
Correct. So one of the ways to think about this is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. A lot of people turn to drugs when they lose their social support around them. And one of the things that we are integrating into the app is a social network that's very, very private and safe, so that you can talk to other members on the app who are going through exactly the same thing that you're going through in your particular Solutions Recovery silo. And when we roll this out to other institutions, you will also have a safe space, almost, forgive me for saying so, just like the basement of the church where Alcoholics Anonymous will meet. It's a public but still private space where you can say what you want to say to other people who are experiencing exactly what you're experiencing. A lot of times people get depressed because they think they're the only one, and they think they can't overcome their addiction. And by talking to each other on this very, very carefully controlled silo, they can get their emotions out. That's method number one. There's other methods, but if you want to speak about that.
The support that you need when you're dealing with addiction, and Michael Federer, the CEO of PrayerSpark.com, you gave us these numbers of people, millions and millions, 22 million plus, who are currently going through the whole recovery from addiction process. Big numbers. I think we lose these people when they're alone and they feel like they're alone.
That's exactly right. And when you look at the traditional blue chip method, if you would, of managing recovery, it's the 12-step program. That is ubiquitously the program that people are engaged with. And there are 6 or 8 different steps that require or mention God or a surrender to a higher power. And when you have up to 70% of people that are entering a rehab that don't have any connection at all, it becomes apparent how spiritual support can be so important, because they can even say, I don't see how spiritual support can help me. I'm an atheist. Well, an atheist, what they mean is they don't necessarily believe in, again, religion 1.0, or the vision that's been painted by one of the major 3 religions. But they can find out that, for example, in the Crow tradition, the earth is our mother. Walk lightly on the earth. They can find out that Buddhists don't pray to God in the sky, but rather to sort of the universe. They can find out that there are these amazing different belief systems. I mean, what do Sikhs believe? God is love is at the center of the Sikh belief system. We aren't exposed to those things very well in the United States or generally in the world. We tend to be siloed off underneath brands that we've absorbed growing up or that happen to be around us. So PrayerSpark is able to bring those sorts of things. But as Dr. Daniel said, it's really, really important that we create these closed silos. And people can say, well, there's all kinds of social community on the internet already. The thing about that, and we all know this so well, and they do comedy things on this, you never know who you're talking to on the internet.
You don't.
It's not curated. And the beauty of what we're doing, because we are a clinical app, Solutions Recovery, for example, is essentially the curation of who gets into the app system. So we have, at a place like Solutions Recovery or other recovery centers or with the other apps that we have in other health areas, because they're going to institutions that already are very, very good at curating because those are their patients and only the patients get the coded numbers to get access to it. They don't have to worry that they're really talking to their boss or someone that is completely out of left field or a reporter. anything like that. It really is a fresh look at how to have social interaction, but behind a very safe wall.
Safe is the word that I was thinking about. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not feeling like you are alone. You feel like you do have a support system, a safe support system. And no matter what your own personal belief structure is, somewhere in this great big world, there's somebody who matches up with you.
That's correct.
So there are other people who can also identify and relate and help lift you up to make you understand that you are not alone. We are talking about prayerspark.com, the new app. In studio with us today, Dr. Daniel Sorborn.
I'm a part of Prayer Spark. We are looking for clinical partners throughout the United States that we can find out where they are lacking in spiritual and faith support. Every hospital has a chaplain, and that one chaplain goes around from room to room offering solace to patients who don't really get that from their doctors. Doctors are not trained to minister to people's religious beliefs, right? They're trained to perform a surgery or to prescribe a medication. But patients are more than just anatomic bodies. They're also souls. They have personalities. They have feelings. And doctors are not quite so good at that. Now, sure, there's always bedside manner. But in today's medical world, we've been given less and less time at the patient's bedside. We're told to see more patients faster.
You have to. We
Well,
got more people in the system. We need to crank through this quickly, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately, it's the flawed system. But what we can do with our app is a hospital can put our app in the palm of a patient's hand. And that one chaplain or rabbi who's running around from room to room can now reach everybody in that hospital, or even after they're dispoed, after they're put back at home, they can still reach them for their spiritual needs. And through the app, you can look for the various religious leaders that somehow speak to you. You're laying in your bed at the hospital with nothing else to do, and you're going through these beautiful prayers that you could ask someone to say for you. And you find one that speaks to you, and suddenly the sky opens up, and you feel better because somebody in the Crow Nation or in Australia or in New Zealand or in Africa has said a prayer for you. Somebody who really, really thinks about you and who knows what they're doing because they're a professional religious person.
That is a huge support system, and it sounds like it's the missing piece. It really does. prayerspark.com is the app that we're talking about today on Talking Solutions. And in studio, we have Michael Fetter and Dr. Daniel Sorborn. We talk about people going through addiction and recovery, and they can't have someone babysitting them or supervising or observing them 24/7. We
That's
just
right.
don't have the resources. So the time when we seem to have problems with people who are going through recovery, not being able to make it through the day or the night or the weekend or the holidays, is when they're alone. But with prayerspark.com, this app, it sounds like that's the missing piece. That's the support system that is there 24/7, anytime you need it. And when you reach out, you get a response.
That's right. You're never alone. And that's one of the wonderful things that this app brings to people in recovery and in some other areas that we'll mention in a few moments. See, what happens is that people can be in recovery for 5 or 6 or 7 years, and then one day they wake up and they say, you know, I feel very comfortable. I think I can have a beer today, or I can take a Valium today, or whatever the case may be. In the community, they say that's the addiction talking. And right now, when the addiction starts talking to you, the historic and classic method of overcoming that really is your sponsor. Either you're going to go to a meeting, and that's not an immediate fix, or you're going to try and get to your sponsor at that particular moment. Those are kind of it. So we're providing more alternatives for that. Through our app, you can get to your sponsor. You can also get to a community that's there. But we have also developed some very important stress reduction tools that are bundled with the app that can help you overcome that moment, because you can overcome that moment where the addiction is talking, and 2 minutes later you say, oh my gosh, what was I even thinking? That's the last thing I want to be doing right now. So in the way that time works, you want to have different solutions for the different kinds of moments that people have as they stay in recovery. And some of the kinds of stress management tools that we're using are groundbreaking and have never been bundled up before.
Yes. So when you approach addiction, you have to look at the science. You have to find out what is it that makes people become addicted and how do you cure them from it? Well, it's hard to cure. However, you can help them to overcome it on a day-by-day basis. And we really only have, in modern science, 2 methods. One is pharmacopoeia. You can give somebody who's addicted to morphine or other opioids, you can give them methadone. But there's very few other things that we can prescribe. If somebody is doing drugs because they're depressed, you can give them antidepressants. You can treat the underlying depression in an attempt to help them not abuse their drugs anymore. However, the other thing you can do is something called behavioral therapy. And this speaks directly to what Michael was just saying. Behavioral therapy tries to use new methods to redirect the person who's addicted from their drug of choice to something that's more positive. And that could be a stress reduction. Okay, so suppose you turn to alcohol because you just can't deal with the stress that's in your life, or your sadness because your spouse left or your spouse died, or a loved one no longer wants to talk to you. And as you said, during the holidays, that can be devastating because this is the time of year when you're supposed to be together with your family. And if you're in a situation where you don't have that, that's when depression sets in. So what the app aims to do is use things such as sound therapy, guided meditations, visual therapy, bright lights. Let me give you an example of the bright lights. There's an illness called seasonal affective disorder.
Oh, sure,
SAD.
SAD.
Right, SAD.
I used to live in Seattle.
Correct.
Where there is no sunshine in the
is no
winter. I
sunshine.
know what you're talking about.
So what's interesting about SAD, seasonal affective disorder, is that it is a form of depression. It's a form of depression that's mediated by the brain and our visual cues for daytime and nighttime. Well, it turns out that certain wavelengths of light, specifically blue light, actually improves mood. And one of the things that we can do with the app is using blue light therapy on the screen of your phone, turned up to a comfortable level for you when you're looking at that light for 15, 20, 30 minutes a day and listening to positive affirmations. It really does make you feel better.
Wow.
And there's one other thing that's very interesting. The Buddhists, their main tenet is the here and now. To be present is what they call it. And one of the ways of being present is to be aware of your own body. And one of the ways that you can be aware of your own body is your breathing. And what we've found is that breathing therapy is enormously powerful. Just from the outside looking in, you'd say, what the heck could breathing do other than give me oxygen, right? It actually turns out that when you're hyperventilating, when you're breathing relatively fast, you don't even know what your breath rate is until you stop and say, how fast am I breathing? If you're breathing quickly, it's actually increasing your stress level. And by intentionally slowing your breath down, you can take yourself from a high stress level to a very calm level. And the app also does that. It brings you through breathing therapy so that you can go from 8 breaths per minute to 5 breaths per minute. And that brings you peace. It really works.
So that goes to how we've structured the company as well. Obviously, we have a leading physician on board as our Chief Wellness Officer and Chief Operating Officer, which are Dr. Daniel's official titles. We have, if not the leading brain scientist in addiction in the world on our board of
Dr.
advisors.
Kuhar.
Dr. Kuhar. We are working directly with clinics and clinicians, places like Solutions Recovery. So we're really all about science. We're not all about what's our own personal belief. We're all about what's been clinically tested. How can we take things that have been clinically tested in clinical environments and help solve various problems and bring those things to bear in a unified way to create something useful for people to be with 24/7. So spiritual support will be very valuable for folks. Maybe they want to get this prayer. They want to know that Peggy or someone or Reverend Jones or Pastor Charlotte here from the Indigo Valley Church is thinking about them once a week. Maybe they want them thinking about them twice a week, or whatever the case may be, to know that they're rooting for them and they're thinking about them and they're giving them positive encouragement for their addiction. But then we have a bunch of other different tools that are going to be helpful as well with that, all the way down to daily affirmations that we have, which are going to be part of the thing, so that every day the Prayer Spark team essentially sends a daily affirmation to a person that tells them that they're part of a bigger group and they're not alone. So those are the tools we're using in addiction. And you went to stress in the holidays. The addiction app has a bunch of other wonderful things like a countdown timer or a count up timer that tells you how long you've been clean and sober. And we have tokens that are awarded depending on how long you've been there. And you can talk some more about some of the other features.
Yeah, one of the things that we're trying to do is refocus the person who's addicted onto this app. And the idea is that people nowadays are on their phones all the time. You see them even when they're not supposed to be, when they're driving.
It's illegal here, so don't.
Correct.
No, Bluetooth.
But you still see it. People on the subway, if you're in a big city or in the bus, even over dinner, people are constantly checking their phones. Somebody who is struggling with addiction, the first thing they're going to do is look at their phone, not necessarily because of their addiction, but just because it's their daily habit.
It's what we do.
It's what
All
we
of
do.
us do it now.
That's right. What we're aiming to do is have them turn to our app and the many different methods that we have to redirect their attention away from their harmful addiction.
Our ability to have created those things then becomes very transportable to some other areas. For example, hospice and hospice care. Part of hospice is providing spiritual support to the folks in hospice, but again, they're confronting the same kinds of issues. A significant number of people in hospice and or their families don't have a traditional belief system where they have a traditional connection to some sort of traditional bricks and mortar church. So that's been an area where we've actually been asked to enter, and we have a really wonderful local partner that we're going to be deploying this into. It has many of the things that we've developed for addiction, but not all of the ones. So what you'll get is spiritual support, you'll get the affirmation, you'll get stress reduction tools, those sorts of things that you will be able to have. And we found a number of other areas that those tools are going to be very, very important, including not just going to institutions for their patients, but going into institutions for the professionals. Because when you're working in a hospice and there have been 900 deaths a year, that becomes very stressful, and you think that maybe you're the only hospice worker with these issues. So it's been brought to our attention that this app is also really going to be wonderful for the professionals. And now it opens up the concept of thinking about firefighters and police officers and anyone who is involved in a occupation where stress, depression, and those things are endemic, but don't feel as though they can enter a social silo to be even talking about it. And that's where our closed social silos, our stress reduction tools, our spiritual support, all of those core elements of what makes Prayer Spark come in and be a very valuable tool for those people.
It makes me think of dentists who have a very high suicide rate because people say, I hate dentists, I'm afraid of them. They're really great people, actually.
Yes.
But I think anybody, it sounds like universally, there are so many different applications where this kind of support, lifting us up, and positive approaches could help people get through a rough patch. And that difficult time could be a couple of minutes. If you just get me through the next few minutes, I can make it.
Right.
It's like a bridge back to a safe place.
That's exactly. Right. We've been approached by a number of chaplains in universities, and they've told us that the number one reason that students are coming into their office is stress. And can we bring this to them as well? Because they can't provide the spiritual support for all of the students that are coming in. Now, that's not to say that every student undergoing stress or engaged in, trying stress reduction at a university is going to be necessarily a candidate for a Prayer Spark app. But the ones who went into the chaplain certainly are. And that turns out to be a fairly large number, as the number of people who are no longer finding themselves part of religious or spiritual communities continues to grow very quickly in the United States and, in fact, around the world.
We just need the connection.
Correct.
We need to be able to connect with each other. We're talking about the Prayer Spark app. It's new, prayerspark.com. In studio with us today on the show, we've got Michael Fetter, who is the CEO, and also Dr. Daniel Sorborn. This app, I think it's appealing. I have addictions, but coffee is another matter. And that's not going to change. That was that living in Seattle and the sad thing. That's what made that happen. But as far as people being able to access, we talk about patients in a addiction recovery process or program being able to access this. But you also talk about hospice workers, hospice doctors.
Hospice patients themselves.
Yeah, and what about the families? What about
Correct.
the other people who are also affected and caring very much about this person, but feeling helpless and also sad about the whole situation? I know that people who are in programs can access something like Prayer Spark, but what about the general population? How does somebody listening to us today, to the show, feeling holiday sadness, having trouble getting through this season, so depressed, feel so alone, how can they also access things like prayerspark.com?
What we have right now in prayerspark.com is actually online right now and working. You don't have to be in an addiction recovery program to use prayerspark.com. That has the immediate on-demand spiritual support from all the wonderful leaders that Michael had mentioned before. So we have two different areas that we're talking about. PrayerSpark.com is where you can go to find just really beautiful spiritual leaders. The apps that we're talking about are a little bit more in-depth. That's what we're trying to talk about here today.
So yes, the initial place that the apps are going to be is in institutions. Initially, for that sort of full wrap of the app, we are beginning our process by going with clinical environments specifically. And again, that goes to the closed silo business. If we just put it out in the App Store, you'd never know who was in that silo interacting with you. So when we go to each individual addiction facility, they're able to curate who's in their silos. That's how we're starting it. And further on down the road, there will be an opportunity to go into, for example, a stress reduction app that'll be more broadly distributed, perhaps in the App Store. We're working on that right now. It's one of the things we kind of wanted to talk about. If you go to the PrayerSpark.com, you can click through, but we have a crowdfunding. It's on Indiegogo.
It's on Indiegogo.
And anybody who's listening and wants to help out, we're using that to try and do just what you're saying, which is to scale this app to make it available to more and more people across the country. So you can actually go to PrayerSpark.com, and I think right at the top, click through, and it'll get you to our crowdfunding campaign. We also have a Facebook page. If you just go to Facebook and type one word, PrayerSpark, without any spaces in there, you'll be able to get to our Facebook page, and there's a whole community there. I think we've got almost 50,000 people on there already. And we're a new business. We've only really been up with what we call our 1.0 version that you're looking at when you go to PrayerSpark right now, just in the second half of this year. We're very busy creating 2.0, which is going to have really cool bells and whistles and some new things that are coming on board, which should be deployed just in the next 2 months or so. So you have to bear with us a little bit in terms of our ability to scale. Like any new business, you start with what you might call a beta, and then you collect a lot of feedback from everybody that's using it and doing it, and then you take all of their ideas and suggestions that have been so wonderful from the community, and then you incorporate them into a better offering with all those bells and whistles. And so that's kind of in the process, and that's where we are right now.
We're right here at the genesis.
We are, yes.
PrayerSpark.com. So anybody can go to the website. Anyone can go to PrayerSpark, your page on Facebook. Of course, I'm going to give you all those links.
And if they want to send a Christmas card or holiday card, it isn't too late, actually, to go on PrayerSpark right now. And it's always free to ask for prayer. And if you want a card, you can order a card from us. I think it's $4.99. We fulfill it completely. We stamp it and mail it. And we put the prayer that was said for you or for your loved one printed in that card, and then the card is sent to your loved one with a prayer from someone that would be meaningful to them.
Oh, I like that.
It's very nice.
That's a flat-out holiday gift.
It
I
is
mean,
a
seriously,
flat-out
the person who receives that card and that special prayer just for them, they're going to hold on to that. They're
Yes,
going
they
to
will.
refer to that card every time that they need to be in touch with that faith, whatever it is.
Correct.
It's pretty happy stuff, actually.
On our crowdfund that I mentioned, we have really wonderful things like wrapped your loved ones in prayer blankets. And we've chosen interfaith prayers said by our spiritual leaders from all around the world. And we have a baby blanket that has prayers from all around the world, from all different kinds of spiritual beliefs that you can wrap a baby in prayer. We actually have one for your pet, and we have one that are larger for loved ones, and we have one for courage. We have one for recovery.
Addiction recovery.
We have one for friendship and love.
And peace.
And we have one for strength. They're really wonderful, and all of those are sort of reward levels for helping out with the crowdfund. Those are available before the holidays, and we even have a Zazzle store that has really cool stuff. And all of that stuff goes directly to PrayerSpark, to our ability to continue to build and scale this app for more and more people in the world.
It's a very serious topic, addiction and the feelings of depression, especially during the holidays, which is overly prevalent. And all of these sad topics, turn around and you start looking at all of the positive effects that are being generated through PrayerSpark.com and your app. So we've got Solutions Recovery, being involved with PrayerSpark.com here in Southern Nevada. You mentioned that you're going to be involved also with a local hospice.
Yes.
I'd say that people in hospice in general are angels of a different sort, that you
They
have
are.
to be driven a certain way to be able to pick yourself up and do that every day.
That speaks to what Michael mentioned just before, which is that there are a lot of professions in our world that deal with daily human suffering. He mentioned a few of them. Workers in hospice, firefighters, police officers, EMT workers.
The military.
Oh, yes. They have after effects when they come
Correct.
back home.
That is right. And you can think of PTSD similar to, in a way, almost an addiction. What happens is that the brain chemistry changes. And what you find out is that with PTSD, people are not just sad, their cues have changed. So when they hear a loud noise, for instance, that takes on the stress.
You know, you find that, for instance, retired military back here home in the States, you're hoping that everything could be right back to normal. It's just not. And when the fireworks go off at the 4th of July, they are tremendously affected by things like that.
Correct.
And or having people to talk to that aren't just someone they can talk to when they go to a group therapy meeting once a week or even once a day. Again, our concept is taking the best parts of what the smartphone has to offer, and it has a bunch of different kinds of attributes that we're going to be taking advantage of, and using those things to create a community where people feel safe and can get all different kinds of support to help them through the difficult times that they're going through.
It sounds very helpful for so many different scenarios. PrayerSpark.com is the website. You can also check on Facebook with PrayerSpark. We were talking about the app, and that is a safe place. For instance, for people who are going through addiction recovery, they can talk openly through the app and request support and feedback and prayers. They can do that without being concerned that that is going outside this protected silo, as you referred to, Michael, where they can go ahead and vent on that. They can go ahead and put out their thoughts and be able to carry through this shaky situation and get through it without having to be concerned that someone who doesn't need to be accessing that information gets a hold of it.
That's exactly right. We've found that the longer people are in recovery, the more public they're happy to be. For example, David Marlin, who's the co-founder of Solutions Recovery, will stand in front of an audience and proudly talk and say that I'm Dave and I'm an alcoholic, and he's been very successfully in recovery for a lot of years, and that is a great point of pride for him, and it would be for anyone. But if you just are in your second week of withdrawal from prescription drug medication or a heroin habit, you don't necessarily want your boss or even loved ones to know about that yet, because it's too delicate, it's too fragile, and you're still protecting this.
You're shaky when you first start.
You bet you are. So
you don't have your legs.
So
Correct.
That's where this level of protection comes in, and where it'll be very valuable. Our goal is to lower that relapse rate. That's what we have our target set on. That's what we wake up thinking about every day, and that's what we solicited all of the expertise from all the folks working all around us in PrayerSpark to help with, lowering the relapse rate.
Because Michael Fetter, who is CEO of PrayerSpark.com, you gave me some crazy percentage of people in recovery who relapse.
92% is the national average.
And we've got more than 22 million currently in recovery programs.
More than 22 million, yes.
Who are currently addicted. And the 92% relapse rate is usually with the drugs that are the hardest for us to overcome. Alcoholism is very difficult to overcome. And alcohol is so ubiquitous. That's why it's so hard to get away from it. It's everywhere.
I had a friend who's gone through a couple of different rehab stints for different reasons and having alcohol issues. When he went into his doctor and they put him into rehab for this second situation, they said, we're going to wean you off the alcohol because if we take you off of it altogether, it will kill you. And I said, I didn't know that. There's different ways it has to be dealt with. There's so much about this that I don't know. I'm so blessed that I don't have to know about it from a personal standpoint, but I think it's important that all of us understand it.
We've all been touched by addiction. You mentioned a number of very famous people that we know about. So even if you haven't been touched by addiction yourself or with a close family member or a family friend or their children or whatever, we're still touched by it with people that are part of the social fabric of the United States and the world, culturally or however. Betty Ford brought tremendous attention to alcoholism and founded the Betty Ford Clinic. But given the number of people that are actually in rehab trying to overcome addiction, you'll find that pretty much all of us know someone at least, if not have a friend or family member, that are in the addiction community or in recovery one way or the other. And if you don't think you do, if you start asking around, you'll find that you do actually have 2 or 3 people in your circle who say, yes, as a matter of fact, I'm in my 20th year of sobriety or whatever. That's why you wouldn't necessarily know about it. But it is a very ubiquitous kind of problem. And when you look at the number of people that are engaged in trying to get clean and sober or staying clean and sober and the relapse rate, you can realize that just lowering that relapse rate just a little bit makes a massive difference, not just on 1 million people who won't be relapsing this year, but on their friends, on their families, on their workplaces. It's got a tremendous sort of ripple effect, if you would. You're throwing that pebble in a pond and it just gets bigger and bigger. So that's where we're focusing our attention for the first app, and we're very happy that you were able to have us here so that we could talk about this with you and everybody who's listening. Thank you so much for your attention.
You're very welcome. I think it's a wonderful topic, and I think it's much needed. Michael Fetter, CEO of PrayerSpark.com. Dr. Daniel Sorborn, also here with us from prayerspark.com. I'm going to be watching this with great interest. We're here at the start. There is so much need. And like you said, Michael, just a moment ago, I think we would all be surprised at how many people in our circle who have been or are still being affected by things like addiction and recovery. It's out there. It's prevalent. There's more of it than you would realize. And just to know that through this app, through their smartphone, through the website, the Facebook page, they're able to get some very positive, uplifting feedback. It could really help all of us.
Those are the areas we're going into. I mean, think about hospice. Hospice, one hopes one ends up in hospice because otherwise you've died very suddenly. You've died in a car accident or for some violent moment or for some unexpected moment. I mean, when you enter hospice, it's because there's planning going on. There's been a planned event that happens in your life. In Vegas alone, there's, I think, 47 hospices. So hospice is an event that is going to touch most people and their families at some stage of life as well. So we're going into those moments where, for folks who say they're spiritual but not religious and don't feel the need to affiliate in a daily basis, they don't have to be in a community on a daily basis. They feel they can be spiritual on the weekend just by looking at the sky or by petting their dog or whatnot. The time that you need that affiliation is when you have that pain. And you have that pain when you're in hospice or you're in the cancer clinic or you're engaged in a stress management situation or you have an addiction issue. Those are the key areas that even when you're spiritual but not religious, you feel that need for connection. And so that's why our apps are being deployed into those areas. We want to make a difference in people's wellness and health. And that kind of is the Prayer Spark story.
Can I ask before we're done, Michael Fetter, who is CEO of prayerspark.com, where did the idea for this app come from?
Well, I had worked many years ago with a very interesting man, Isaac Tigert. And Isaac Tigert was the co-founder of the Hard Rock Cafe. Then his second big venture was called the House of Blues. Many of us have heard of that. I worked with Isaac in the House of Blues. I was deeply involved in the arts community, and I brought forth a lot of the Southern vernacular art. So Isaac decided to do a big third business, and he builds bricks and mortar. He builds things that are tangible you go into. And obviously the Hard Rock is rock and roll music. The House of Blues, it's rap, it's hip hop, and it's gospel, and it's blues, right? So it's so-called vernacular music, if you would. And his third one was going to be about world music, the Brazilian conga line, all these different things. And he wanted to infuse it with spirituality because that's very important to him. And he was going to call it the Spirit Channel was the working title. And I was fortunate enough that he had had a wonderful experience working with me with the House of Blues, and he came back and got me to work with him in the Spirit Channel. And this was about 15 years ago. We did a lot of research and talked to a lot of folks in a lot of different places about what the future of spirituality was with people and what they meant when they said they were spiritual. And 9/11 happened, and Isaac decided that he didn't want to be part of the capitalist world anymore, and he retreated to an ashram in India. A lot of people don't know this, but he gave most of his money away, built a hospital in India that's done a lot of free surgeries and procedures for the poorest of the poor. And Isaac today still lives on the ashram. So we never moved forward with that bricks and mortar project. And it was just as I had mentioned earlier, it was 2.5 years ago that I saw this feed that said Nelson Mandela was sick and he was in the hospital and his supporters were asking that you pray for him, where I remembered my work with the Spirit Channel. And I remembered so many of the incredible spiritual people that I'd met and been exposed to. And I thought maybe there's a way of thinking about some of the information that I had gathered at that time with Isaac and then redirecting it toward delivering blessing and prayer and creating, if you would, a cyber or digital environment for that in a more modern application than religion has historically presented. So that was kind of how it was born. The original impulse was Nelson Mandela, of all things. And as I saw that, the concept of Prayer Spark and how it would come together came to me. As we were able to build the opportunity for spiritual leaders to come on board and for our ability to deliver those blessings and prayers, then it became apparent we could apply those in these medical areas. And Dr. Daniel joined me as our Chief Operating Officer and our Chief Medical Officer to help with the promise of that delivery in a way that was scientific and made sense.
This is how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together.
That's right.
Dr. Daniel Sorborn is also with us. Isn't your title also Chief Wellness Officer?
That's right. The idea is that we are not practicing medicine with this application. What we're doing is we're offering support in a way that doctors can't. The doctors have not been trained how to provide this kind of support. What we do know, though, is that human beings are more than just their blood and bones. They're also a soul. And what we're trying to do is add this kind of support to their medical treatments, if you will.
It's part of it that was missing. It's the part that's with you when you're alone, in the dark, and feeling low and thinking you can't get through it, and you can reach out and access prayerspark.com.
That's right. And we're not trying and would never think of interfering or getting in the middle of people's existing spiritual connection. So if someone already has a spiritual connection, if they have a church or a synagogue or a community that they're part of, then that's fantastic. But it's for those people who don't have that. And as I say, not only do we have wonderful, if you would put them in the category of more traditional spiritual leaders, but our spiritual leaders are so interesting. Our friar was a Vietnamese boat person who came over on the flotilla and decided to give thanks by becoming a friar and dedicating his life to God and to helping people. And then on the far other end, we have the head of the National Wiccan Church. So we have all different kinds of spiritual beliefs represented, and they're all real people who actually really get your request, really think about you and say that prayer for you, and then affirmatively let you know that, in fact, you've been thought about and that prayer was said.
Great place to start to find out about this very exciting program, prayerspark.com. Is there anything that I missed?
That's a great question. I think we covered a lot of ground here.
We did. We covered a lot of ground.
I think you did.
Obviously, we're interested in anyone who wants to help us by contributing to the crowdfund that we have. If people want to help us because they know of a rehab facility or a hospice or that sort of thing that they think would be appropriate or they're part of one, please feel free to reach out to us. They can reach out to us through the website. And if they want to provide us some oxygen because they love this, we're certainly open to all kinds of queries from folks who want to help us do this. We're a really dedicated team. When you go to the prayerspark.com page, you can go to About and then look at the team and look at the bunch of advisors that we have. We're incredibly diverse. We are inclusive, and the more the merrier when it comes to us and our ability to build this business.
prayerspark.com is the website. Also, they have the Facebook page at prayerspark. By the way, speaking of Facebook, you know that all the links will also be on our Talking Solutions Facebook page, including a podcast of today's very interesting interview. I want to be sure to thank both of you. Michael Fetter, who is CEO of prayerspark.com, and also Dr. Daniel Sorborn.
Thanks so much for having us.